The dogs saved their lives. All of them. Every kid in that cafeteria. If Shadow hadn't barked when he did, the school principal paused, her eyes red as she looked across a lawn filled with stunned parents. We wouldn't be talking about a miracle. We'd be talking about funerals. It was supposed to be a fun day, a community event, a chance for the local police K-9 unit to visit Willow Creek Elementary, shake hands, show off some tricks, and teach kids a thing or two about safety. Balloons on the fence, banners that said protect and serve, juice boxes, and pizza for everyone. But by 1:17 p.m., the event had turned into a lockdown, and a German shepherd named Shadow had become the only reason no child was in the ICU, or worse. 5 hours earlier, Officer Jake Monroe tightened Shadow's harness and gave him a gentle scratch behind the ears. The big K-9 yawned and shook off the morning air like it was nothing. Big day, buddy. You ready to meet some third graders? Shadow let out a single bark. Jake smiled. I'll take that as a yes. It was just past 8 a.m. when Jake pulled the cruiser into the staff lot of Willow Creek Elementary. The sun was still climbing over the maple trees, and the building buzzed with the usual Monday morning energy. Teachers herded sleepy kids inside. A couple of parents waved goodbye, and the smell of cafeteria bacon was already in the air. Principal Dana Reynolds, a warm woman in her 50s with silver-streaked curls and a firm handshake, greeted Jake at the side door. Officer Monroe, thank you for doing this again. The kids haven't stopped talking about Shadow all week. Jake chuckled. He's a humble celebrity. Just don't ask him to sign autographs. Shadow trotted ahead, sniffing around, tail wagging just enough to show he was in working mode but relaxed. The first hour went exactly as expected. Jake spoke to the students in the gym about K-9 units, how they're trained, what they do, why their job matters. Shadow performed perfectly, sitting, tracking, even finding a hidden key under the bleachers. The kids erupted in applause. By 11 a.m., Jake and Shadow were invited to stay for lunch. Mac and cheese Monday, Dana said with a wink. And don't worry, we've got extra for Shadow. The cafeteria smelled like nostalgia. Melted cheese, baked bread, juice pouches, and tater tots. Jake sat near the end of a long table with a few teachers. Shadow lay at his feet, panting contentedly. That's when it happened. Shadow's head snapped up. He sniffed once, twice, then stood. His body tense, not aggressive, but alert. Jake immediately picked up on it. What is it, boy? Shadow moved forward, nose low to the ground, weaving between students like a four-legged missile. He stopped near the serving counter where trays of food were still being set out by cafeteria staff. Then he growled. It was low, deep, and unnatural for the friendly dog who had just done a round of high fives with a group of kindergartners. Every kid at the nearest table froze. The cafeteria went silent. Shadow took a step forward and barked, sharp, urgent, and aimed directly at a tray of mac and cheese that had just been placed on the counter for distribution. Jake was already moving. He grabbed Shadow's leash, raised a hand, and addressed the room. Everyone, stay calm. Teachers, please move the kids toward the far end of the cafeteria. Principal Reynolds was beside him in seconds. What's going on? Jake's eyes were locked on his dog. I don't know yet, but he's telling us something's wrong. Shadow barked again and pawed at the counter leg. The kitchen staff, 2 lunch ladies and a high schooler doing part-time work, stood frozen. One of them, Mrs. Loretta Hines, dropped the serving spoon in her hand and brought it to her mouth. Loretta? Principal Reynolds asked. The older woman's hands were shaking. I didn't. He was just supposed to stir the cheese. I swear I didn't. Jake cut in. Ma'am, I need to know exactly who handled that tray. Loretta blinked, eyes watery. My nephew, I got him this job. I didn't think he's had a tough time. Jake crouched beside Shadow and looked closer at the tray. The dog wasn't just pointing. He was guarding. His whole body was positioned to block access to the food. He stood, turned to the staff. No one touches anything else. Clear the kitchen now. Shadow stayed posted near the tray while Jake called it in. Dispatch, this is Officer Monroe. I need a hazmat and food safety team at Willow Creek Elementary. Possible food tampering. 1K, 9 alert on a serving tray. No one injured yet. 30 minutes later, the cafeteria was sealed off. All students were safely back in classrooms. Several parents were called early to pick up their children, and the Department of Health was en route. Jake stayed in the gym with Shadow, whose behavior had shifted back to calm, but still watchful. The dog's eyes didn't stray from the kitchen entrance. Dana Reynolds paced behind him. I don't get it. How could he have known? There's no smell. I mean, you saw the food. It looked fine. Jake didn't look away from his partner. That's the thing about dogs like Shadow. They smell what we can't. Emotions, changes in chemicals, even intent. He nodded. If something in that tray was made with anger, hate, or even carelessness, he picks it up every time. Dana swallowed hard. What happens now? Now, Jake said, standing up and patting Shadow's side. We wait for the results, and we figure out what that kid was planning to feed your school. At 3:12 p.m., the call came in. The food in that tray, marked for Mrs. Hayward's third grade class, tested positive for an artificial additive that could trigger anaphylactic shock in children with nut allergies. It had no business being in a school kitchen. It wasn't part of the official ingredient list, and someone had put it there. Whether it was intentional or a cruel joke, the outcome could have been fatal. Shadow had stopped it. Back outside, news cameras were already rolling. Jake kept his distance while Principal Reynolds addressed the press. He's a dog, she said, voice trembling. But he's more than that. He's instinct. He's protection. And today, he was our voice of reason when no one else noticed something was wrong. Shadow sat calmly next to her, his head slightly tilted, as if confused by the attention. He didn't care about the cameras. He only cared that his kids were safe. The school was quiet now. Parents had taken their kids home early. Lunch trays were still sitting where they'd been left untouched. The hallway lights buzzed softly in the silence, echoing off the tile like a metronome, counting down the moment everything had almost gone wrong. Officer Jake Monroe stood at the front office window with a paper cup of lukewarm coffee in his hand. His K-9 partner, Shadow, rested on the cool floor beside him, head on his paws, still alert despite the stillness. Across from them, Loretta Hines, the longtime cafeteria cook, sat on the bench with her hands wrung together like a used dish rag. Her eyes were red, her voice dry from hours of worry. Jake had seen this look before. People who knew something, people who carried guilt. They didn't know how to explain. I should have said something, she whispered. I should have told someone. Jake kept his tone calm. Told someone what? Loretta looked up at him, ashamed. About my nephew, about how he's been changing. Jake sat beside her, careful not to crowd. Take your time, he said. Tell me everything. His name was Tyler Hines, 19, dropped out of community college. Been living with Loretta for the last 6 months after some problems at home that no one in the family liked to talk about. She got in the cafeteria job through a temp agency. The school had needed extra help during the lunch rush. Loretta had vouched for him. He seemed okay, she said. Quiet but respectful. Always wore his gloves. Never complained. But then I started noticing things. Ingredients missing. Fridge left open. Once I found him staring out the window at the kids like he was miles away. She paused, glancing down at Shadow. And then today when I saw him near the tray, his hands were shaking. I asked if he was okay. He just nodded and walked out the back. Jake frowned. Did he say anything? Leave anything behind? Loretta shook her head. Just this look in his eyes, like he knew what he'd done or what was about to happen. Jake stood and called the station. I need an address for Tyler Hines, possible suspect in a food tampering case. Get a unit to secure the residence. I'm heading there now. Shadow rose to his feet, instantly alert. The Hines house sat at the edge of an older suburb. One-story ranch style, cracked driveway, mailbox hanging by one screw. Jake knocked twice. No answer. He glanced down at Shadow. The dog sniffed the air, tail low, body tense. Let's try the back. They rounded the side yard, stepping through dry leaves and a collapsed wooden gate. As they reached the rear patio, Shadow let out a quiet growl and lowered his body to a crouch. Jake spotted the figure through the sliding glass door. Tyler was inside, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, headphones on, staring blankly at a turned-off TV. On the coffee table in front of him sat an open lunch tray, the same kind used at the school. Jake tapped the glass. Tyler didn't move. "Police?" Jake said, loud enough to be heard. Still nothing. Jake slowly opened the unlocked door, hand on his holstered sidearm. Shadow followed behind, poised but controlled. "Tyler," Jake said calmly, "we need to talk." The young man finally looked up, pale face, dark circles under his eyes, trembling hands. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said. Jake didn't speak. He let the silence hang. "I just wanted him to know how it feels," Tyler continued, "to be invisible, to be pushed around. Those kids, they don't care who's behind counter. They make fun. They throw food. They laugh when they think no one's listening." He gestured toward the tray. "It was just a little powder, something I bought online. Not even dangerous unless someone's allergic." Jake replied, his voice flat, "There are kids at that school with peanut allergies, egg allergies. Even small exposures can send them into shock. You knew that." Tyler's lips trembled. "I didn't think it would get that far." "But it could have," Jake said. "And the only reason it didn't was because a dog smelled what you were trying to hide." Tyler looked at Shadow, and for a moment, something like guilt washed over his face. "I'm sorry." Jake sighed. "You don't need to tell me that. You need to tell it to the parents." At the station later that evening, Jake filled out the report while Shadow dozed under his desk. Tyler had been taken into custody without resistance. The charge would likely be reckless endangerment, possibly more, depending on the final lab results and school district decision. But for now, the threat was over. Still, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't about poison or revenge. It was about being seen or not. The next day, Jake returned to Willow Creek to drop off an official update. He found Principal Reynolds in the cafeteria, reorganizing tables and helping staff get ready for the kids' return. "Back to normal?" Jake asked. Dana smiled weakly. "Whatever that means now." She turned toward Shadow and knelt, scratching behind his ears. "You're the reason none of our parents had to receive that call. You know that, right?" Shadow licked her hand once and lay down calmly, like it was no big deal. Dana looked back at Jake. "I've been principal for over a decade, and I've never once questioned the kitchen. Not once. But I think maybe we forget that bad things don't always come from the outside." Jake nodded. "That's why dogs like Shadow matter. They don't care about titles. They just follow the truth." Dana leaned back, watching the sunlight spill through the cafeteria windows. "Do me a favor, Officer Monroe. Name it. Next time you bring him for a school visit, make it a surprise inspection." Jake grinned. "You got it." That night, Jake sat on his porch, dinner plate in his lap, Shadow beside him, munching on a well-earned slice of grilled chicken. "You ever get tired of being right, boy?" Jake asked. Shadow didn't answer, just looked up with calm, knowing eyes. Jake laughed and shook his head. "Yeah, me neither." The day after Tyler's arrest, the atmosphere at Willow Creek Elementary was tense, but determined. Teachers welcomed students back with extra smiles. The janitorial staff cleaned the cafeteria twice over, and Principal Dana Reynolds stood by the front doors, greeting every child by name. But even with the school's best efforts, a quiet unease lingered in the hallways. Kids whispered about the lunch tray thing. Parents exchanged loaded glances in the pickup line, and the staff couldn't shake the question: how close did we come to disaster? Officer Jake Monroe knew that question was only half the problem. The other half, why no one said anything sooner, was what stuck with him as he parked his cruiser in front of a small white bungalow on Laurel Street later that afternoon. Shadow sat in the passenger seat. "Ears up? You remember this place, bud?" Jake asked, rubbing the back of the German shepherd's neck. Shadow gave a soft whine in response. This was where Loretta Hines lived. She hadn't been charged with anything. Technically, she hadn't committed a crime, but the district had placed her on administrative leave pending further investigation. And Jake could tell from her face today, before, that this wasn't just guilt by association. There was something else, something deeper. He walked up the porch steps and knocked gently. A moment later, Loretta opened the door. Her eyes were puffy. She looked like she hadn't slept. "You're not here to arrest me, are you?" she asked, managing a weak smile. Jake shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just want to talk." Loretta stepped aside. "You and Shadow are always welcome here." The inside of her house was tidy, but tired. Faded floral curtains framed photos of grandchildren on the mantel, and a faint scent of lemon cleaner hung in the air. A crock pot simmered quietly in the kitchen, but Loretta didn't move to check it. She gestured to the living room. "Please sit." Shadow curled up near the coffee table, eyes never straying far from the front door. Jake accepted a seat on the worn couch. "I've been going over everything," Loretta said after a long silence, "trying to figure out where I went wrong." Jake leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You didn't poison anyone, Loretta." "No," she said, "but I let someone walk into that kitchen with pain in his heart, and I pretended it wasn't there." Jake stayed quiet. She looked down at her hands. "Tyler's dad, my oldest son, he left years ago. Drugs, jail, in and out. Tyler bounced around. Lived with his mom, then his aunt, then back with me. Always quiet, always keeping his head down." She shook her head slowly. "But lately, I started noticing changes, not just in how he talked, but how he didn't talk. He'd come home and sit in the dark. One night, I found him shredding papers, old birthday cards, drawings he made in elementary school." Jake frowned. "Was he ever in counseling?" "We tried. He hated it. Said nobody ever listened anyway." Loretta took a shaky breath. "So when the school needed extra help and he needed something to do, I thought this might help. A purpose, a routine. Kids are good for the soul, you know." Jake nodded, but he didn't see it that way. She continued. He saw it as another place where he didn't belong, where people smiled at him, but never really saw him. He told me once, "People treat you better when they know your name. I wear a hairnet. I don't even have a name tag." Jake sat back, letting that land. "He told me he didn't mean to hurt anyone." Jake said after a moment, "But that's the thing with hurt. It doesn't stay where you put it. It spreads." Loretta nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I wanted to ask something. Not as a cook, not as a witness, just as a grandma." Jake looked up. "Do you think he's evil?" Jake blinked. "No, I don't. I think he's broken. And broken people don't need punishment first. They need someone who's not afraid to stand next to the mess." She exhaled, deep and full of sadness, and maybe, finally, a little relief. "I'm not asking you to fix it," she said. "Just don't let him be forgotten. That's all I ask." Jake nodded once. "I'll do my best." Back at the station, Jake typed up his final report for the incident. He wrote it plainly. He didn't dramatize, but he made sure to include Shadow's role in detail. How the K-9 had identified the tampered tray, remained in a protective stance, and signaled the danger without fail. He ended with a line he rarely used in official documents. "The actions of K-9 Unit Shadow prevented a potential mass casualty event. His instincts and training should be recognized not only as heroic, but as necessary." Captain Linda Vargas stopped by his desk as he hit send. "Heard you handled that school case better than most would have." Jake shrugged. "It was Shadow." Linda smiled. "Still, you listen to your dog. That's not nothing." Jake smiled back. "He's usually the smart one anyway." The next week, the school board hosted a closed-door meeting. Jake didn't expect to be invited, but he showed up anyway. Sitting in the back in uniform, Shadow at his feet. Toward the end, Principal Reynolds stood and requested to speak. "There's been a lot of talk about liability policies and background checks," she said, "and those things matter. But what matters more, at least to me, is that a child didn't end up in a hospital because a dog followed his instincts." She paused, and that a woman who's fed this community's children for over 20 years had the courage to speak when it mattered most. She made a mistake, but she didn't ignore it. She came forward. She gestured to the back of the room. "I recommend Loretta Hines be given the option to retire with full honors." The room murmured in agreement. Jake exhaled slowly. Shadow let out a soft huff beside him. As if sensing the shift, a week later, a modest ceremony was held in the school courtyard. Loretta, dressed in her Sunday best, received a plaque with her name etched beneath the words, "A Legacy of Service." Jake stood nearby with Shadow, who wore his polished vest and a brand new silver tag that read, "Shadow, Guardian of Willow Creek." Students placed thank you notes at his paws. One of them, a little girl with asthma, hugged him tightly and whispered, "Thank you for smelling the scary stuff." Jake's voice caught when he read that note later. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Jake grilled chicken on the porch while Shadow waited patiently by the door. "You keep doing that thing where you smell what the rest of us can't," Jake said, "and I'll keep trying to understand the stuff you already figured out." Shadow tilted his head, like he agreed, and somewhere in the glow of quiet forgiveness and second chances, the world felt a little safer. 3 weeks after the incident at Willow Creek Elementary, something unexpected began happening in schools across the county. Phone calls, emails, letters from parents, not complaints, requests. "Can Shadow visit our school? Would Officer Monroe be willing to talk to our students about what happened? Can we start a K-9 safety program at Lincoln Elementary? 2. It started with a single mom from Crestwood who wrote on Facebook about how her son, who had a severe peanut allergy, now slept better at night, knowing a dog out there could smell danger before anyone else could even see it. The post was shared over 10,000 times in a week. The story had quietly gone national. Shadow had become a symbol, not just of safety, but of something deeper, instinct, trust, and listening to the quiet things that get overlooked. Officer Jake Monroe hadn't planned to start any sort of program. He and Shadow had been back to their regular schedule. Routine patrols, occasional school visits, and late-night paperwork with stale gas station coffee. But when the school board called and asked if he'd help launch a pilot safety and empathy program, he didn't hesitate. They called it Pause for Safety, a rotating program where 9 teams would visit schools, not just to do demonstrations, but to build real human relationships. Teach students about awareness, inclusion, and how animals like Shadow could sense emotions humans often missed. "I'm no teacher," Jake had told Principal Reynolds, who was coordinating the launch. She smiled. "That's okay. Shadow is." Their first presentation was at Lincoln Elementary, a school just 2 towns over. Jake stood in front of a packed gym with Shadow beside him, both of them framed by a banner that read, "Heroes come in all shapes. Some walk on 4 legs." He wasn't nervous, but it wasn't just a normal talk either. "I'm not here to tell you how to be safe," he began. "I'm here to show you how to pay attention." He walked slowly, letting the kids stay engaged. 3 weeks ago, Shadow smelled something wrong in a lunch tray. Not because it looked funny, not because anyone told him. He just knew. He gestured down to the dog, who sat calmly beside him. He knew, because he was trained to trust his instincts, because he listens to the world the way most of us don't. Jake scanned the crowd. 4th graders, 5th graders, some already whispering to each other. "But here's the thing," he added. "You don't have to be a dog to do that. You just have to care." He shared a few pages from anonymous notes students had written after the Willow Creek incident. Some from kids who had food allergies, others from kids who felt invisible at school. One note read, "I used to sit by myself at lunch. Now someone sits with me. Maybe that's because of the dog." The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. Shadow barked once, perfectly timed, and the place erupted in applause. Back in the teacher's lounge afterward, Jake leaned against the counter, sipping lukewarm coffee while Shadow rested under the sink. Principal Barnes, a younger woman with cropped hair and smart glasses, sat across from him. "Not bad for a guy who says he's not a teacher," she said. Jake shrugged. "It's the dog. I'm just the guy who drives him around." "You know what I liked?" she said. "You didn't just talk about safety. You talked about seeing people. That matters more than ever now." Jake nodded. That's what this whole thing was about. Tyler Hines, he wasn't trying to be a monster. He just didn't know how to be seen. Principal Barnes was quiet for a moment, then said, "We got a few kids like that here." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Every school does." She smiled. "So, when can we book you again?" "Over the next few weeks. The pause for safety program grew faster than anyone expected. A local news station ran a feature titled, K, 9 Saves Lives and Start a Movement. Shadow got his own segment, complete with slow motion footage of him running across a school field, tail wagging, ears perked. Jake hated seeing himself on camera. Shadow didn't seem to mind. What surprised Jake most wasn't the attention. It was a change. Teachers began noticing quieter kids, speaking up. Cafeteria workers were greeted with good mornings instead of silence. More parents got involved. One dad even volunteered to repaint the staff break room, just because it felt like the right thing to do. It was like the school itself had woken up. Then came the invitation Jake didn't expect. We'd like you to speak at the State Education Board conference in Albany. Jake stared at the email on his phone, blinking. I'm just a patrol officer, he said to Shadow, who tilted his head. I don't even like public speaking. He thought about deleting the email. Then he thought about Leia, the little girl who was almost a victim, Loretta, the grandmother who finally spoke up, Tyler, the teen who got lost, and every student now paying attention to things that didn't get talked about before. He hit reply. Yes, Shadow and I will be there. The day of the speech, the room was filled with suits, PowerPoints, and expensive coffee. Not Jake's usual crowd, but he stood behind the podium, Shadow at his side, and told him the story from the beginning. Not about the tray, not about the chemical, but about the bark that no one expected, and how that single bark had started a chain reaction of awareness, healing, and action. You want safer schools, Jake told them. Start with paying attention to the quietest kids, the quietest corners, and if you're lucky, listen to the dog. He finished to a standing ovation. Shadow barked once, perfect timing again. That night, Jake drove home with the windows down, letting the cool air fill the cruiser. Shadow leaned his head out the backseat window, ears flapping. Jake laughed softly. You know you're a celebrity now. Shadow didn't react, just stared out at the road, as if already looking for the next thing nobody else could smell. 6 months later, the echoes of that single bark were still rippling across New York State. Officer Jake Monroe sat quietly at a long table inside a high school gym in Syracuse, flipping through a notebook filled with questions written by middle school students. Shadow sat at his feet, watching the kids file in row by row, his ears perked and tail low but wagging. The pause for safety program had grown beyond anything Jake ever expected. It started with a rescue, then a speech, then a second school. Now, it was a statewide initiative funded and endorsed by the Department of Education, bringing K-9 teams into schools for safety awareness, emotional support, and empathy building. Shadow wasn't just a police dog anymore. He was an ambassador for listening. The assembly began with a few words from the principal. Jake stood quietly until introduced, then walked to the center of the court, microphone in hand. Shadow beside him. I'm Officer Jake Monroe. This is Shadow. And we're here because 6 months ago, he barked. There was a ripple of laughter, but only because the room had no idea what was coming next. Jake explained the story again. The school lunch tray, the chemical compound, the child with nut allergy who never knew how close they'd come to disaster, the cafeteria worker's tears, the nephew's confession, and the truth behind the bark that broke the silence. And then he turned serious. You know what scares me more than poison? He asked. Silence. He looked out across the crowd of young faces. There are people in this room who feel invisible. Kids who sit alone at lunch. Teachers who go home exhausted and wonder if they're making a difference. Parents who don't know how to ask for help. He took a breath. Shadow didn't bark because he knew the ingredients. He barked because something felt wrong. He paid attention when the rest of us didn't. Jake knelt and scratched Shadow behind the ears. And that's what I want you to take away from this. Pay attention. Trust your gut. Be the person who hears the thing nobody else is listening for. There was a stillness in the gym that only real truth could create. Then came applause, not loud, not frantic, just honest. After the event, Jake helped a group of students pet Shadow, answering their questions one by one. Some wanted to know about training. Others asked if dogs could smell sadness. A few asked if they could grow up to work with animals like Shadow. One girl, maybe 10, held a sketch pad in her hand and stood a few feet away until everyone else had gone. Jake smiled at her. Hey there, what's your name? Abby, she said. Want to meet Shadow? She nodded and approached slowly, then held out her sketch pad. On the page was a hand-drawn picture. Shadow standing between two lunch tables, his nose pointed at a steaming tray. Flames around the edges of the drawing. That's really good, Jake said, stunned by the detail. She looked down. I was, one of the kids who was supposed to eat that lunch. Jake's heart dropped. Abby continued, her voice quiet. I have a peanut allergy. Real bad. My mom says if I had eaten that food, I might have. She trailed off. Jake put a hand on her shoulder. You're here because Shadow barked. And because of that, your story isn't over. You still get to write it. Abby smiled faintly, then knelt beside Shadow and wrapped her arms around him. He's my hero, she whispered. Jake didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That night, Jake sat on his porch with a blanket over his legs, the early autumn air already starting to bite. Shadow lay beside him on the wooden floorboards, chewing gently on a rubber toy shaped like a badge. Jake held a letter in his hands. This one from Tyler Hines, now in a court-ordered rehabilitation program upstate. Officer Monroe, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I've been going to counseling. I read a story about Shadow in the newspaper. They called him a guardian of empathy. That got me thinking, if a dog can care that much about people, maybe I can learn how to do the same. I'm trying to get it right now. Thank you for stopping me before it was too late. Sincerely, Tyler Hines. Jake read the letter twice, then set it down and looked at Shadow. Guess we're not just catching bad guys anymore, huh? Shadow thumped his tail once, eyes steady, as if to say, we never were. A month later, Willow Creek Elementary held a dedication ceremony. Not for a statue, not for a building, but for a garden planted just outside the cafeteria. A winding path led through flowers planted by students, with names like Hope, Trust, and Second Chances painted on stones along the trail. In the center was a bronze plaque on a short post. It read, in honor of K, 9 Officer Shadow, who heard what others missed and reminded us all to listen. Jake didn't cry in public, but that day he almost did, especially when Loretta Hines, recently retired, stood beside him and said, he didn't just save lives, he gave us back our ears. Later that week, Jake spoke at a small town hall. No cameras, no press, just parents. He told the story again, simpler this time. Then he said something he hadn't written down, something that came from watching Shadow over the past 6 months. I think most of the danger in this world doesn't come from evil. It comes from overlooking, from brushing things off, from choosing not to look twice, from thinking it's not my problem. But when a dog barks, you don't argue. You pay attention. He paused. Maybe we all need to be a little more like him. Sometimes the smallest sound, one bark, one word, one whisper, can stop something terrible from happening, but only if someone is willing to hear it. Pay attention to what feels off. Trust your instincts. And most importantly, be the person who listens when no one else does.